Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sarah Martin with the Contoured Chemist. All right guys, today is going to be a troubleshooting video. We are talking troubleshooting coverage. I'm going to focus on coverage mainly because that is the number one thing I hear, whatever the case may be. There are some very simple, straightforward things that you can try in order to get more coverage. So I'm going to go over those today. If you want to check it out, please keep watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. All right, friends, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you my face as I talk through some of the key things of getting more coverage. And we're going to talk mostly about 3D foundation today, but I am going to talk a little bit about Demi Colour as well, since it is an option. But for the most part, we're going to start with 3D foundation. And the three most critical things, I believe, through my experience, is the best ways in getting coverage, what you can do and not do, and what makes the big difference. So, first of all, this is the first thing I do when I sit down to do my makeup. And I feel like not all artists talk about it or stress it. And the way I'm going to be showing you how to get coverage, it's a non-negotiable to me. Can you guys guess what it is? I know my OGs around here are going to know exactly what I'm talking about because I'm always showing it. The Perfector. Okay, so this has been sitting here. This is completely dry, stained as always, but I like to wash it while I prep it. Always and will forever be the first thing I do before I sit down to do my makeup. And I will explain why when I get to that step, because it literally can make or break this application method. So I would take you over to my sink and show you exactly how I do it. But I'll be honest, it's been one of those weeks around here. Ran the dishwasher last night, and yet my sink is still full of dishes, if that tells you anything. So sorry, I'm not gonna show you that. But I'll be right back, and then I will explain exactly what I did. Okay, now you can tell it's still stained, but I swear it's cleaner. I sprayed it with my Dawn Power Wash spray. I like to do that every time when I prep it. That way it's always going to be free of bacteria. You're going to have to wet it anyway. So it also forces you to fully saturate and rinse this out to get out all the soap, obviously. And it causes you to fully squeeze and release under running water a good 10 to 15 times to get out all the bubbles. Meaning you're not going to just be doing this under running water, which doesn't fully expand your Perfector. So here's one of the old ones we used to have. Your Perfector should completely double in size. Okay, it should not. If you're using your Perfector dry, I promise you're not going to get the results. This will not pull off excess. This will. Okay, so I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I wanted to kind of show you. Now, I squeezed it into the sink. Cat hair be flying. And I just squeeze it like probably most normal people squeeze it, okay? This is where I feel like I noticed the biggest difference when I figured it out and how I make sure I prep my Perfector every time. When you squeeze it, I'll just do this on my floor. I want you to squeeze it so much. Don't worry, I've got a towel down there. And I want you to shake it. Squeeze it again as hard as you can. There was so much water still left in there. Guys, if you would take that and you're doing, say, a 5-minute face, and then you go and touch that to your face, it's actually gonna do more harm than good. And I'll show you that in a little bit. But this has to be where you got every possible drop of water out. Then I want you to take a towel, squeeze out in a towel, move it to another place, squeeze it out again, squeeze it out again. Okay, and this is a really absorbent flour sack towel. Guys, I've even tested different towels. This is how I do it every time. This is how I know my Perfector gets perfectly prepped every time, which makes this application that I'm gonna show you night and day difference. And I'm telling you, when I get messages that saying, you were right, the Perfector being prepped just right is a game changer. It truly is. But I see so many people use this dry or not even realize that they're supposed to dampen it at all. It blows my mind, okay? It's important in my eyes. So everyone applies differently and has their own way. This is for what I'm going to teach you today. All right, so now I'm gonna just set this baby out, and while I talk, it's actually gonna be air drying, which is again important. Now, I still do the exact same method if I am doing a quick 5-minute face, and I will show you, I tend to wait till the very last step to use this, just so it's as dry as possible and not overly damp, okay? Shouldn't feel wet. Like right now it feels wet if I squeeze it. It shouldn't feel wet by the time you use it. It should just feel cold to the touch, okay? There's a difference, I promise. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the top 3, I would say, biggest reasons you might not be in coverage. The big three, all right? Number 1, without any doubt in my mind, is the color you're wearing, okay? And I will be completely transparent with you guys. The reason I color match the way I do now is due to just overall troubleshooting advice needed for how to get more coverage. That was the number 1 thing I heard all the time was, I need more coverage. And it wasn't from everyone, but know that the color of highlights you are matched to will determine your level of coverage. Okay, all our highlights give coverage, obviously, so do our contours. They're all designed to give coverage, but every highlight shade will not give you the same amount of coverage. When you look at our line of highlights from darkest to lightest, the lighter your highlight goes, the least it will cover anything of depth on your face, whether that is a point of maybe you have a little bit of hyperpigmentation, or you have redness, or you have dark circles or purple underneath your eyes, and you are trying to use one color all over, and maybe you're naturally fair, and so you feel like, well, I can't use color corrector because that is way too dark for me, and it's gonna pull me dark. I'm telling you, that isn't true if you've been matched correctly. But from what I have observed over the years of troubleshooting with clients is the lighter in our highlight shades, the more technically, the more certain pigments are in there. And I've just noticed those white pigments, it's technically titanium dioxide, that gives that white color in our creams. Obviously, they're all different amounts because they're all different colors. And so there's different proportions and formulations of the highlights. The ingredients might be the same, but the proportions of each are not. And some of these colors correct better than others. And the lighter you go in our highlight range, you will not see this in the darker skin tones, but the lighter you go here, because somebody might be like, well, I'm super fair, I need those super light shades. More oftentimes than not, those people come and say, I am not getting coverage in this place A, B, and C. And if you look at their face, it's because their face has depth in those 3 places. And the lighter colors do not offer the same level of coverage as you go darker in our highlight shades. That's why, if you've seen my videos before, I'm always talking about matching the darkest point on your face. It is literally night and day difference. When you just use a color that matches that point, it will suddenly give you amazing coverage with the smallest amount of product, and it will also completely change your longevity, because longevity and highlight shades and using too light of a shade are completely related when it comes to our makeup. And if you're wearing a shade too light, your longevity and your coverage go down. Okay, so just remember, if you want better coverage and better longevity, you got to make sure those darker points on your face are met. And I'll be honest, when I first started as an artist, I couldn't see that yet. I couldn't look at even my own face and realize, okay, Sarah, you have a much darker nose than the rest of your face. I didn't know it. I had thought one color everywhere would give me the same coverage, and it just didn't, okay? And you'll notice, so this is a good way to test this. If you need better coverage on certain areas, really look at that point and be like, is it darker there? Like makeup free. Is it more red there? Is it hyperpigmentation? Is it blue or purple? What is the case? Because this area around my mouth is super light, but it is not the same color as here, or even here, or here, or here. My color of my neck is extremely even. You can tell my face is not even, and most of my customers probably don't have as many concerns as I do, but a lot of them have skin similar to mine in the fact that their skin is not completely even everywhere. You don't have the same level of depth on all the points in your face, and naturally that will happen as we age. As we age, all of that prior sun damage comes to the surface. We increase our amount of hyperpigmentation, and even if you don't have it all over your face like I do, because I've always been a freckled kid, you might start seeing it pool here, which is very normal. Your nose might be naturally just darker because, again, that part sits out, it sticks out the most. Usually those are the points of our face that are darker than, say, our neck. My neck has very little freckling because it's always shadowed, and I always wear my sunscreen. But as we age, those bits of hyperpigmentation, they just naturally get darker every year, unless you're getting something done to get them lasered off or whatever the case might be. I am adamant with my skincare, yet that does not budge. Hyperpigmentation is one of the hardest things ever to get rid of, because again, like I said, every year it gets darker as we age. The joys, right? So redness also, I was not this red 5 years ago. It's because as I got older, I developed rosacea, and broken capillaries, I would say, is another thing that most people maybe didn't have in their early 20s. But if you are in your 40s like me, then broken capillaries are probably something of concern. Areas like this, using a lighter shade that say matches your neck, for example, will never cover that. It will actually look more textured in that area, start wearing off. I have more complaints of people saying that their nose is wearing off or not giving them enough coverage. And that's, again, because usually our noses are darker even if you don't realize it, or it's due to things like redness, hyperpigmentation, or rosacea, broken capillaries. All of those things make your skin have more depth in certain areas of your face, but not everywhere. That's why our skin tone is no longer as even as we age, and why I specialize in color matching the mature face. Because again, we also get a lot of texture as we age. Lighter highlight shades do not sit the same. They actually will emphasize that. And so we do have to color match mature skin differently than, again, a teenager, okay? It just sits differently on the skin. And since I often do rematches, I see more than anything, and I know I have a lot of artists that watch my channel, so please listen. When you have somebody and their neck is naturally lighter than their face, you cannot give them a highlight shade to match their neck and expect them to get coverage on the darker points of their face. So if your entire face, and again, you can look at yourself and be like, is my entire face or parts of my face darker than my neck? If you're matched to one color and that color is matching your neck, you will never get adequate longevity or coverage on those darker points. If you're given a color that matches those points, obviously that's going to be much darker than your neck, and then you're not going to stay matching your neck if that's how you like to wear your makeup. Okay, so there are reasons why I started using color correction, and that was one of the main points. Okay, so my neck is lighter than the darkest points of my face. If you can't tell, my nose is much darker than my neck. Okay, if I were to use the color that gives me great coverage and great longevity on these areas of my face I need color correction on, I won't match my neck at all. I will look a lot darker and warmer from here up. And I do like to match. I do consider that a personal preference. That's why in my color match questionnaire, which I will link down in the caption below, I ask you that because some people like their face to be a little bit lighter than their neck. Some like it darker. Some want to match. Some want to match their chest. Some people have a lot of different tones, but unless you tell your artist exactly how you want to wear your makeup, they're going to be playing the guessing game of like what to give you, and you're not going to maybe get exactly what you want. So in my opinion, it's what you want, not what I would wear myself. I want to make sure you get matched the way you want, and you're getting the coverage on the areas you want, which is why I also ask in that, what are your areas of concern? And you might say you have none, but I still see depth in your face. I will still match you this way because that is the only way you're going to get coverage and longevity. Does that make sense? So it might just be that you are simply darker on certain points. You might have depth that you just never notice because you've always just used a traditional liquid foundation and it just does not work in the same way. But if you tell me, I also have hyperpigmentation, redness, and under eyes that I'd like more coverage on, that tells me, okay, I'm gonna make sure I'm giving her a color that will correct that. Now, not everybody needs multiple shades and you has to need a separate color corrector. It truly comes down to your exact skin tone, okay? So some people might fall exactly at the point of a shade that color corrects all on its own because of the undertones of that shade. Then there's shades that really don't color correct much on their own at all. They're either very light to white, maybe barely yellow or even neutral, that won't color correct everything, okay? And so our highlights on their own give amazing coverage for those that have an even skin tone, doesn't have a large amount of contrast between areas of their face. If it's subtle, you won't notice any difference, and an artist shouldn't have to give you any kind of corrector. But if it is red or dark, like hyperpigmentation, that you can clearly see a difference between points of their face or again, their neck, a color corrector is the easiest way to make sure you get the coverage you want on those points so that you're happy with your makeup. Now, when I talk color correction, a lot of times I get a lot of questions like, well, which ones are color correctors? That is determined by the artist. I could call it a color corrector if it is a highlight shade that corrects that concern well, since not all of them do, and different combinations can be used depending on the person's undertones. It's one of those things that just takes a lot of experience and being able to train your eye to see what will work for clients and what won't. And again, every client's face is so different. So that being said, if you come to me for a rematch and you're not getting adequate coverage on certain points, you might have to get a completely different match depending on what you were originally matched with. There are certain combinations of these shades I don't recommend layering because the undertones of it might pull you way too yellow or way too orange, and I just know that you won't like it. Unless you are very warm or very yellow, but not very many people are. And so sometimes you might have a color and you'd be like, well, can I use this with it? And it's not gonna give you the best look. And so I will tell you how you can try it or how you can maybe use what you have. If you include that in your color match questionnaire and tell me what you have already, it better helps me be able to tell you if there are other ways you can utilize those highlight shades without having to fully return them if you don't want to. And then last but not least, there are some shades that are not highlight shades that you will see artists talking about color correcting. Frenchie, for example. Frenchie is, let's see if I can find it, is a lip and cheek color. It is matte. It is this one right here. And you can see it's very salmon undertoned, okay? And we have discovered over the years that it actually color corrects blue and purple tones under the eyes really well. If you have a similar depth to my under eyes, you might be able to use it. I personally will not offer you more than one color corrector. I don't feel like it's necessary. Yes, I can use Frenchie under my eyes. I have videos where I've done one side with Frenchie and one side with my normal color corrector. You can't tell the difference. But if you need to utilize color correction anywhere else on your face, why pick more than one? Okay, so Frenchie is just for under eyes. In my personal opinion, it does not work for redness or hyperpigmentation. And so if your under eyes are your only concern and you do not need a darker shade anywhere else, then you will see that I will offer Frenchie as a suggestion. Otherwise, you're not gonna ever see me offer that if you're already using a color corrector somewhere else. Like, why get an extra shade? The reason I don't use Frenchie is because I need color correction other places. So you can always try it later if you kind of want to see the comparison. Maybe you like it or prefer it under your eyes. I have some clients that prefer that over what I use, which is Mango. The application is a little bit different because the consistency is different, but I always use Mango to color correct because I need that for my full face. Frenchie won't work anywhere else. So know that if you see people talking about it, it just kind of depends on your specific concerns. Same thing goes with sometimes you see people using contours. Again, some of the contours like Aspen, a lot of people like to use for redness. In my opinion, it has to be a very specific type of redness on your face, and it really determines based on the rest of your general skin tone if it's a good choice for you. And again, if you have any other concerns, because if you also have under eyes, Aspen does not color correct under eyes. It's like a blue-gray, it's like a blue undertoned gray contour. It's not going to help with purple or dark circles. So again, that's kind of how my mind works. I'm not going to give you an additional shade when you can use one for everything. And there's some shades in our highlights that are really good for a variety of things. 3 off the top of my head are what I use the most, I would say, for all of the concerns I've been talking about, which is everything from, and when I say concerns, I'm talking color, not texture of the skin or anything like that. We're talking color issues, things that could be corrected due to a color difference in your skin. So those dark spots, the redness, broken capillaries, under eyes, if you have scarring, even lack of pigment is virtually the same thing because you're using a darker shade to add pigment. So I'm going to show you what I use on the daily, and that is what I call Magic Mango. Again, this might not work for all of you. I would have to see your face before I can make a suggestion. But Magic Mango is amazing at correcting a large number of things, which is why I call it magical. So I'm gonna go ahead and go in with the blush end, and mine is pretty dried out, and you can tell there's not a whole lot left because I've probably been using this 10 for 6 months. The key with any color corrector, and please hear me, because the number 2 thing after not getting enough coverage is somebody is using color correction and they're saying the color is pulling off. The number one thing that matters is amounts. You always want to start with the least amount of product, and that kind of goes as a whole with 3D foundation. Since these colors are so pigmented, most people just apply too much at the beginning. Start with a light hand. Start by buffing on the smallest, thinnest layer possible. You can always add more later. You can always build up coverage. This makeup works in a way that allows you to build up coverage and get anywhere from very natural skin-like finish to full coverage, depending on the amount of the highlights you're applying. But one thick layer of, say, a color that does not correct, which is my main shade, will never give you the same coverage as, say, a thin layer of a corrector plus your main shade. It just won't, it can't, it's impossible. It's the nature of these creams, all right? So I always recommend buffing small circles. This is my favorite brush for beginners because it covers a large surface area, so it doesn't take too long. It's the blush brush. It is the best brush also for mature skin. You can get anything from medium to full coverage with this brush, but it doesn't pick up too much product, which means you can get the thinnest layer, because it doesn't matter what colors you're using. If you're applying too much highlight, it will start looking like the color in the tin on your skin. And when that happens, you're applying too much product. If you're applying a shade like this and telling me it's pulling yellow, that shade is not yellow. It's one of the most neutral shades we have. It just tells me you're applying too much, or you're not using your corrector, because you're having to apply so much of this to get coverage. And that's one of the reasons why I say color correction is a game changer, is because if you're using a color too light, you have to use far too much product. And in fact, going a little bit darker, maybe adjusting your main shade, or maybe just incorporating a color corrector under your main shade, would allow you to use far less of this shade and get better coverage and better longevity. To me, it's a win-win. I don't care if I'm layering products when I can actually get a skin-like finish by using this method. I feel like the biggest thing that people say, oh, don't layer, is because they're afraid of looking cakey. Using too much of a shade too light is what's gonna make you cakey, not using a darker shade to get coverage and then evening it out with the correct colors. But the number one thing is the amounts you use. And of course, if you're applying a shade way too dark to color correct, and you're applying it so heavy that doesn't matter how much of your main you put over it, it's not toning down that warmth, of course your shades are gonna be off, okay? Light hand, does that make sense, okay? I literally am just putting just enough, you can tell, okay? It's really not changing the color of my skin tone much at all, but it's already evening out my skin tone with literally this tiniest amount just buffed on. And I'm even gonna show you how I do it up on the majority of my face. Okay, so I have some dark points right there. I'm just buffing on a little. It didn't completely cover them. That's okay. With this method, you don't want to apply so much of your corrector that you're like, okay, I still keep seeing them. I still keep seeing them. I just need to keep putting on product. Trust the process, okay? Just buff on, small amount. Then we're going to go to your main, okay? Trust me, okay? Keep it light-handed. Now, again, this makeup always takes some trial and error. So if you're brand new, it will take you a little bit of time to kind of learn how much to dip in, how much to buff on, and what's a good amount for you. But also know your skin changes daily. It's the nature of our skin. And so one days you might be more red, especially if you have rosacea like me. You might have to put on a little bit more of your color corrector one day, a lot less the next day. Pay attention to your skin. Okay, you'll see that spot is not disappearing, but man, is it getting a lot more blurred out. Okay? And I'm even gonna take a little bit down here just to give a real light hand, and it just gives a little bit more evenness. Doesn't fully take away every dark spot, but it evens that area out. Okay, same thing here. See how light I am around my mouth? And yet I need this color, all these darker points. That doesn't mean I don't want to even out my skin a little. Very little. I do have a little melasma mustache there that sometimes I like to get a little bit more coverage on. Okay, we're just slowly evening out our skin tone with each very light hand of our shades. And if full coverage is what you're after, I'll show you which brushes I would recommend. But again, this one is for my newbies. Okay, I typically use the blend brush, but I'm gonna go ahead and use the detail. Since these are the two I recommend to start, this brush is it's very similar to the small end of the blend, which is what I like to use around the smaller points. Now, I haven't done anything on my nose. Sometimes I might kind of take a little bit, but honestly, my full nose is still way darker, right? So I never swipe into the product. It's gonna lead to too much. Tap, 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 light-handed, okay? Then I'm just gonna hit, and I'm buffing. Even with this tiny little brush, I'm really getting it to kind of almost melt into the skin. These creams don't melt in, but I mean, it's physically impossible due to what they're made out of. But you'll hear people say that a lot. Now, the warmth of your skin will help it blend out. That's completely true, but it will not ever penetrate your skin. So I like to buff in, and again, this is really to distribute the product across the surface. If you just start pushing in one place, you're gonna see, yes, it will build up in one place, but we really want to buff on to distribute the product where you need the coverage. And look at those broken capillaries. Look how it's already just using a little bit. That redness. Suddenly my nose is more or less starting to match the rest of my face. Now you can tell it's a little dark for my neck. And I probably, to be honest, if I kept it very light-handed like this, I probably could use a brightener to kind of bring in my lightest tones and have it semi-match, because this area of my face is not naturally as dark as the rest of it. So sometimes I will match that way. If you could still match your neck in a way, you might just be given 2 shades, okay? So I am gonna use the small end, and now I'm gonna hit that blue on the inside corner and use the lightest hand possible around my eyes. You can see I got a lot of purple and I got a lot of hyperpigmentation, which is why Mango does work best for me, because it corrects both the dark spots and the blue purple tones. And it's just due to the undertones of Magic Mango. Okay, I even go all the way up and get the purple tones in the veins on my eyelid. Okay, I have already primed my eyes, otherwise these creams would crease on my very oily eyelids. Okay, so I've already done my light hand buffing in of just Magic Mango, my corrector. Okay, so number 2 on coverage is brush choice. I always recommend a brush you can buff on. to keep that corrector thin. If you are using a brush like this and trying to apply a layer of your color corrector and then also then go over with a layer of your main shade, I can tell you right there, you will think this makeup is heavy, cakey, and your colors are gonna pull way off because this brush will pick up so much product, it's impossible to keep it a thin layer of your corrector. So your brush choice can be a major factor in coverage. Because this brush lends to swiping, it can actually lead to streaking and moving that product from where you placed it. So I do feel like brush choice is critical, okay? Now, if you are using something like the blend brush, which is one of my favorite brushes, this is definitely a natural finish brush, and then you're coming to me and saying you're not getting enough coverage, it's because you're using a brush that picks up the lightest possible amount. And you might have to go to a brush like this that will be able to place the product a little bit more, or utilize this differently and go to those points on your face not getting enough coverage and use the dents in to press on more, okay? So I always recommend a buffing with that corrector. This brush does not buff well, it's too floppy, okay? The detail I do love. This is more of a natural finish brush and it actually buffs on the color corrector really well, and then you could use this small end to press on more where you need extra coverage. The buff brush. Now, most people think, okay, I need more coverage with this makeup. I'm just gonna pick up a more full coverage brush, but then you're not getting the results you want still, and it's usually due to your color, okay? So if you are still using a brush like this and still not getting adequate coverage or looking cakey or having longevity issues, it's probably a simple tweak, like you need a color corrector somewhere or your colors are just completely off for your skin. And sometimes, I'll be honest, your colors might look fine. I wore the wrong color for years. Like, I thought it was fine because it matched, I looked fine. I didn't get amazing coverage on areas, but again, as my skin started getting darker in points, I was realizing it was starting to look cakey and a little chalky. And I'm like, this isn't really giving coverage on, and it all started with this dark spot. And that's when I tried Magic Mango for the first time, and I'm like, how does that work? And it literally blew my mind that I could use such a dark shade when I was not nearly that dark, and that it worked, okay? So it completely changed the way I match and will for always match. So make sure you get to check your colors and make sure they're not wrong. This brush does not, even the name says buff, it doesn't actually buff very well. But once you are no longer a newbie with this makeup and you have been using it a bit, you know how much to apply, you know your colors are right, and say you're using this and you're getting about medium coverage and you want to be able to get full coverage, then I say pick up the buff. This brush presses on really well and it will pick up a lot more product, which in turn is going to give you that full coverage. But since you know how much to apply, you will not have those issues of sticky and tacky, and you know the basics of using our tools, right? Okay, so brush choice is everything. Also using the brushes correctly, and making sure you're not buffing with a brush that doesn't buff well, etc. So actual application methods. I have entire videos showing how I use all of these brushes in more detail depending on the coverage you want. Let's go ahead and go to the next step, keeping it with this brush. Okay, now I'm gonna go with my main and build up a little coverage and bring it back to matching my neck. This is a little dark, a little warm. We're gonna tone it down. And these colors specifically work in that way that this will match the darkest point, color correct what I need it to color correct. This one is neutral to tone down the warmth and keep me matching, okay? And so your colors, I choose very strategically based on the coverage you want and what you tell me you want and what you tell me you want to match and what you want coverage on. I take a lot of things into consideration so that you can utilize these methods and get the look you want. All right, let's go in with my main shade. This is Sandy. Same brush, tap. You can barely see any on there. And all I do is, again, method matters. A lot of people, when we're troubleshooting, I realize, and I know if you've been color matched by me, my color match response is very long and very detailed. And I know through experience, not everyone reads it, but I do that for a reason, so that it's like a guide. When you get your makeup, you can follow it step by step, and it can help you avoid all of these issues. I know I'm a little type A. I like to give too much information. I'd rather have too much than not enough. And so I'm giving you all that information, not to be a pain, but simply so that you can get the results you want from the first application, which I know I never had. I never had that. It took me years to figure this out. So please read it. And I explain how to avoid this, because I get all the time in my inbox where people aren't getting the coverage, and it's because they're going in and they're buffing on this next part. Well, this will move what you all just placed. So especially if you are just color correcting a certain point of your face, then you go on and buff on your main shade, you're gonna move all your color corrector from the place you were trying to get coverage on, and it's gonna mix. There is a huge difference between these two shades, mixed and layered, okay? This is a completely different shade. It's different when you are matching the darkest point with very little product and then pressing on the main over it. Can you see the difference? How much lighter that is, how much more neutral that is, and how this one is just like in between the two, and it's still warm. You're not going to tone down this warmth if you're mixing them together. It's just going to create maybe a little less warmth, but it's not going to give you the coverage because you're just mixing shades instead of building up in thin layers. And that's what we're talking about today. We really are trying to build up coverage on those points you want the most coverage on. And so even if you're not a full face color corrector and you're just working on maybe a few points of your face that you need extra coverage on, same concept applies. Okay, so we're going to tap and then press. I am bouncing. I'll do it in slow motion. I tend to do this really fast because after all these years, people are like, isn't that method slower? Doesn't it take forever? No, after, like, it's with anything you practice and you get really fast at it because it's kind of muscle memory that you just press it on all over. Just tap it. Okay, so slow motion, tapping on, and all it is kind of pressing that into the skin. Again, not into, but you guys know what I mean. Slowly building coverage where you need it. Now you'll see how even my skin looks. If you go real close up, you might be able to still see some dark points, but for the most part, that completely evened out my skin from the way it originally was, right? And so I kind of just pay attention and I'm like, okay, did that fully cover? Do I need a little bit more anywhere? Okay, and we'll do that here in a sec. So I'm just gonna go ahead and press this all over my face. No buffing, so we're not losing any coverage or mixing any color corrector. Okay, I'm gonna go back to that smaller brush because this brush cannot get into the contours of my eye very accurately. So I like to just simply tap on a little bit more, a little bit strategic. If you can see, I kind of skip that lower lash line area so that I'm not putting a bunch of creams right there where I tend to have the most texture. But I have areas right through here that have a lot of depth and were really blue and purple, and you can tell that they're not anymore. And I'm kind of evening out my hyperpigmentation that kind of pulls around this orbital bone with extra coverage. So I'm doing this still with my mane, okay? Everywhere I want a little bit of extra help. Again, we saw how dark my nose was. So my nose takes a little bit extra and I tend to press it on. I'm pressing to get increased coverage. Now, I do recommend a lot of times if you are brand new to the makeup to perfect in between layers. With this method, I'm not. I'm going to show you how to not do that when you're at that point and you're ready. If you still feel like you are really heavy-handed, say you are buffing on your mango, but you step back and you're like, I look like an Oompa Loompa, you need to still perfect between layers because this is the only thing to remove excess. But I'm going to show you that in a minute. Let's go ahead and contour real quick. Now, I get asked all the time, why do I not contour first? Contours and highlights both offer coverage, correct? But that contour is not going to cover redness and the hyperpigmentation I have in my contour line. And I've noticed over the years, I pull really red when I contour without any highlight under it. I see the dark spots peeking through the contour because it doesn't give me enough coverage. Contour is not something you can easily build up. It needs to be blended or it looks really dark and unnatural, right? I get far better blended contour with this method. I correct everything so that when I place my contour, it's not moving that corrector. It blends out 10 times easier. In fact, I've done videos showing both methods and you can see the dark points through my contour and how much more patchy it looks when it's applied first. So this is the only way I apply my contour now because I just don't like it. Otherwise, it gives me too many issues. It pulls warmer, doesn't give me as much coverage, tends to look patchy. And again, my longevity of my contour actually is also affected. So if you're having longevity issues, a lot of times it's just because you need a corrector, whether that's under your contour or under your main shade. Detail brush. I'm not gonna explain this because I'm already talking so much, but I'm just gonna contour as usual. Now, coverage in this area, again, you can expose all of that if you start blending this way, okay? We don't want to swipe it on and have to really work on blending it because our color corrector, our main shade was all down and we have really nice coverage now. We just want to be able to contour without exposing the redness and the dark spots. So the way I avoid all of that is by pressing it on and pressing to blend. No buffing motions, no back and forth swiping. I never swipe except my illuminator. So we're gonna go start up here at the ear and we're just gonna kind of tap that into place, stop about the corner of the eye, okay? Now that we're just tapping it along that line, we start blending it out, okay? And it naturally just starts blending. You see how pretty, see how easy that is? So just start then tapping upwards. We're gonna get a nice ombre as we move up, but we want that definition that that straight edge of the contour brush will give us. So I just keep tapping. You'll notice my cheeks turn a little bit more red just because I have reactive skin. And if I touch it, it will turn red, but it will die down once I stop applying. And there you go. I find application 10 times easier in my contour to do it that way. And again, practice makes perfect. I've been doing it this way so long, I can do it blindfolded and still get it blended perfectly. Okay, if you need to, just pick up the same brush you used for your highlight, and it can help blend out as well. Till you, if you need to kind of pull it back a little, if you get blended in a little bit too far, blur those edges like so, just by, again, pressing. I'm just pressing, so I'm not moving. Then forehead. Now you'll notice I did not really color correct near my forehead. My forehead is one of the most even areas of my face. I put a little bit of mango right through here, and that's about it. I don't have a lot of dark points either, but the same thing applies if you do need to get extra coverage under your contour. You can just press to blend, okay, instead of so much pulling motion. Pretty much you want to avoid pulling anywhere you used that corrector. Nose contour under the lip. Okay, now we're at the point where we can go ahead and use our brightener. It's optional, but if I match you and I mark up your face here, that means your neck might still need help in order to stay matching if you're wanting to match your neck. And with the colors you were matched to, your brightener might be crucial in keeping you matching by bringing in the lightest tones and helping to tone down this area as well. So sometimes it is critical and you want to kind of keep that same brush, and then you just press along the jawline to again tone that down. Now, I feel like with this, once I use my main, I'm matching really well. So I don't usually do it for myself personally, but for clients, a lot of times I do recommend that. So I'm gonna go ahead and just tap in with my brightener. Okay, one of the biggest things I see with under eye coverage is those people are applying their brightener directly under their eye without color correcting or using their main first. What did I say about the light shades? They offer very little coverage, okay? So if you naturally have bright under eyes and you don't have any depth there that you're not wanting to see through it, you're fine. You can apply it straight there. If you have no texture under your eyes and you have very light under eyes, naturally, go for it. I have very light under eyes naturally, but I have a lot of spots within them that give them the appearance of depth. Like I have the veins around my thin skin that shows the blue and purple, and then I have all these spots of hyperpigmentation, and that's what makes my under eyes look dark. So if I am to not use my color corrector, I can't get coverage on that. And if I wasn't to use my main shade in order to kind of tone that down a little bit more, my brightener would not sit well on that area of my skin. Because if you put a shade too light, any area of your face darker, you're not gonna get coverage. It's gonna increase the look of texture. Sometimes it might even look chalky under your eyes. That's usually due to either the wrong undertone of your brightener or just way too light for your general skin tone. So I'm just tapping this on, and I am kind of focusing again. Right here, I have a lot of hyperpigmentation. Every thin layer is gonna add to that coverage, okay? Now, a lot of past videos, I use the buff brush for this. And so if you like full coverage under your eyes, tap in with the small end. I'll kind of show you on this side. Now this will pick up far more product. Let's see if my brightener, I swear, has been in my compact for a year because I use so very little of it that since I apply less now, you see how much that gives more of a full coverage effect. Okay, again, I'm tapping, never swiping. okay? But it does offer me more coverage right here on that dark spot as well. And again, if I wanted to take it over here on that one, I've got dark spots everywhere. You can also take it a little bit down the forehead if you need that brightness. Sometimes people need a little bit on the chin as well to tie in, and then right down those stripes. And there you go. So far we have completely highlighted and contoured, and now it's the magical step, baby. So you might be like, all right, your makeup looks real heavy, Sarah. I don't care what kind of coverage I get if it looks cakey and heavy. And it's because with this method, you are building up layers, you are building up coverage, but the only way to keep it looking like skin, to make sure you don't have creasing, because again, our creams don't set. So anywhere that is constantly moving, like around your mouth or your eyes, the creams will eventually migrate and set there. They're gonna settle into the lowest points of your face. It's just, again, the nature of anything that doesn't set on your face. So what is the solution? The Perfector. I recommend this for everyone. Everyone. Doesn't matter what kind of coverage you want. It's the only way to remove excess. So if you are new and too heavy-handed, if you're trying to build up coverage, if you ever said that these creams are cakey, it will never be cakey with the right colors and this, because I applied 3 shades under my eyes. Do you see any cakiness on my face whatsoever? Cakiness is usually because it's too light and you're having to use so much product. If I was to put my brightener shade over this spot without color corrector first, it would look cakey. And that's because it was way too light for the spot under it. So make sure you're matching the darkest points first. Okay, and then this is dried out, using this bad boy properly. Dry, let me just show you. It literally does nothing. It might help blend, kind of blur some lines a little bit, but in my opinion, a dry Perfector is worthless. Actually, I take that back. The only thing I ever would use a dry Perfector for is applying setting powder in a pinch if I don't have a brush. You can apply setting powder with it. Otherwise, I don't recommend it. Too wet will pull off your coverage. So if you are up to this point and you start using your Perfector and it is pulling off your makeup in patches, go back to the beginning of the video and see how much I squeezed that bad boy out. There cannot be any water in it, okay? And so I'd say the less time it takes you to do your makeup, the more vigorously you need to squeeze this out. Because at this point, mine, I've talked too long as usual. Mine is pretty dry, actually. I can still feel a little dampness. Oh, sorry, not dampness, coldness, but it's pretty dry. But if I was to do a 5-minute makeup routine and I hadn't fully gotten all that water out, you might need to dry it in the towel twice as much as I did if you know you're just gonna throw in your makeup really quick and you're gonna need this to not pull off your coverage. Does that make sense? So now, because mine has really dried down a bit, another key thing is that you are not swiping it. That will move stuff. Just pounce, okay? And constantly move as you feel it on your face. No longer feels cold. The warmth of your skin will almost warm this up. To me, that's like my indicator that I need to move this around. And so I like to concentrate under my eyes, since again, that's where I needed the most coverage. That's where I layered all 3 shades, okay? And so I'm just tapping, and then that felt no longer cold, so I'm gonna move it and hit the other one. Do you see the difference of how much excess that pulled off? But it is not pulling off all my coverage, but I'm gonna show you if it does, how to add more. Because I occasionally, here I'm gonna do it so you can see, occasionally right there, I don't know if you can really see it, right there, my coverage pulls off sometimes, especially when my Perfector isn't completely dried enough or a little too damp. Okay, I'm gonna concentrate right here. Smile lines tend to crease, okay? These tend to pool. Okay, blend nose contour if you contoured it. And then you can also blur out your contour line if you need to. Okay, so our noses are a little weird. Sometimes your noses are rough and need exfoliation. Sometimes they're almost slick and makeup doesn't like to stick to it. I tend to have both, and I'm a skincare junkie, and it makes no sense to me. It's just a different type of skin under our eyes and on our noses, right? So whether it is on your nose or other areas of your face, after you use this, you reassess, okay? It's very simple. If it pulled off too much coverage anywhere that you're like, man, I want more coverage there, you go back. And this is very, very important for those that are covering acne or blemishes. Sometimes this, especially if it is an active blemish that is maybe more an opened wound that makeup doesn't stick to very easily, sometimes this will just pull off all that coverage. Sometimes I will barely touch an area that might have a blemish just to make sure it doesn't look cakey, because those can be areas that can look really cakey if you're using 3D and not something like the Demi. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and assess my face. And that's when I'm going to say, okay, do I need more coverage anywhere? If you have areas like blemishes that need more, I recommend matching the size of the points you need coverage on with your brush. And sometimes that might be the multitasker and really pinpoint application. And sometimes it might just be the end of that detail or the blend brush. And sometimes you might need more of that corrector and your main shade. So there's no rule saying you cannot go back and do more than one layer. One layer is not going to cover every level of depth. Now, if you come to me and you already are using a color corrector and you are telling me that you have used this method I'm about to show you and layering multiple times your corrector, your main, your corrector, your main, and setting it, and it is not lasting to where you're seeing depth show throughout the day, that means that your corrector is not dark enough for that point. Just simply means we need to adjust your corrector. Okay, so if you're using your main multiple times and it's still showing depth through it, you need a corrector. Okay, so again, it's all about the darkest point. And sometimes we have to adjust because even hyperpigmentation and rosacea, like I said before, can vary. And some days it is maybe inflamed. Some days maybe you've had more sun exposure. And some days maybe you haven't exfoliated. I know my dark spot changes all the time because I'm a self-tanner and I'm always exfoliating. So I exfoliate and then my spot's not as dark some days. And then I tan like today and it gets darker because self-tanner will make everything darker. It can't pick and choose, right? So I'm gonna go in and I'm just gonna hit just a little bit of my corrector. And usually I don't pay too much attention to this spot. I think I'm used to it after all these years, but I'm just going to press on a little bit of my corrector and a little bit of my main if needed, if it's kind of still, if I can see that I just corrected it. Like if it looks darker and I need a little bit, then I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna grab a more precise brush. This spot of hyperpigmentation has been getting darker lately. And sometimes I just put a little bit of corrector and it's fine. Now, sometimes you might have something in your contour line and you might have to put a little bit of corrector, and then you might have to go in and put just a very tiny bit of contour in order to not create this lighter point in your contour line. Okay, so it can depend on where exactly the place is, and what kind of coverage you need on it as well. A lot of times I will go back in with my corrector and put a little bit more on the side of my nose, and then a little bit more of my mane to kind of tone that down. And then I won't even apply any more brightener, because if I apply a little bit more brightener, sometimes that brightener increases that texture there. Because again, the lighter you go, the more our brighteners can be the cause of texture. And so sometimes I just skip that area if needed at this point in the process. I've already technically brightened and perfected. I don't feel like I really need it, so that's good. So this is usually the point after the perfector that I go back in, I pinpoint blemishes, any points that I might need an extra amount of coverage on, whatever the case may be, and then I set it, okay? Now, I do feel like this is important, but you also want to make sure, especially with blemishes or parts of your face you touch often. And I feel like it kind of goes without saying, but again, if it's like you touch your jawline a lot, or you touch your nose a lot, or, you know, area of your face where your phone sits, or whatever the case may be, set the area. That way, those creams aren't going to go anywhere, and you aren't going to have any issues with it wearing off either, because it's set in place. The vanilla dust is the most finely milled, so it will be the least cakey looking. But if you like a matte look, or you have covered a large area of your face, say, you know, if you have acne breakouts or something like that, then I'd say just pick up a powder puff and a loose powder and press it on all over, in order to kind of make sure that if you accidentally do this and forget, it's not going to just take off any of your coverage. Does that make sense? So I always go back in, since my under eyes are my biggest concern, and I just make sure that I don't have any creasing, because I've been blinking a lot since I put my perfector there. And then I'm just going to tap on powder. Okay, so under the eyes, I just touch it. Okay, and then I'm going to go down that side, make sure that coverage stays there. And I like to hit points on my face, like sunglasses, for example. This area of our face, if you wear glasses and you're constantly having to push your glasses up, you might have to apply a little bit more of a color corrector main shade. Make sure you get it fully covered, and then set that in place. Those are kind of those areas of concern that are different for each person. Then if you want a more dewy finish, you can always use the setting spray after that. But I do find setting with a powder will give you better longevity necessarily on those types than just doing a spray all over, at least from most of my clients' experience. Now, last but not least, that was the 3 things. So color is everything. Optional color corrector can literally completely change the way this makeup looks, wears, and the coverage it gives. Brush choice makes a huge difference. So how you're using the brush and the brush you're using, you can easily change those, or change the way you're using it and get more coverage. And then your application might take more than 1 layer. You might have to slowly build up coverage. And then finishing, that use of the Perfector, I'm telling you guys, is a game changer. Now, if it's pulling off your coverage, you're not prepping it, drying it enough. If you're trying to use it dry, try it damp. Game changer. Try setting with your powder. Now, if you are at this point and you've been using 3D for a while and you're still not getting the coverage with the colors you were matched to, let me just tell you, that is numero uno, as important. If you have been trying to match yourself and not getting these results, go to a experienced artist, get their opinion on if those are actually going to cover what you're trying to cover. And I know sometimes you can look at the website and be like, nope, that's too dark for me. Can't, no. Trust me when I say I have matched, I don't even, over 10,000 people, women at this point. I have thousands that could probably attest in the comments that color is everything, and using the wrong color is a make or break whether you're getting coverage and longevity. I promise you, I'm not lying to you. It is a game changer if you just trust the process and trust their advice to you on how to apply it, okay? Because even if you have the right colors, if you're applying them differently, you're probably not gonna like it in the same way. So follow advice, okay? Now, option after that, you've tried it all, you've done it all. Maybe it's as simple as you just want a little bit of extra coverage from what peeks through, so that you're not having to layer as much product, or you're not wanting to go with maybe a lot darker color corrector, or say you use color corrector in the eyes and it just gives you too much texture because you have more mature eyes like I do. That's when I'd recommend trying Demi in combination with your 3D. So I will link a video I just did recently that's kind of short and sweet, talking about Demi. These are used very differently, and obviously we don't have time to really go into that now. If that's something you want to see in more detail, just let me know in the comments and I can work on a Demi video. Yes, this product can be used alone to filter out concerns, but in my experience, it works really well. 3D if used correctly, but that is definitely not under 3D foundation or those texture. You're gonna get worse texture because you're gonna see the texture of these. But say I was still able to see these points on my face, I could easily kind of pick up a Demi corrector and get more coverage by being really strategic and precise with certain colors based on the color theory. If you're willing to learn it, it is completely different as far as application and knowing what color to choose, obviously, but it is another game changer when it comes to the world of Seint and these magical creams, okay? Also, these creams are not the same formulation as these, so application order definitely matters. So I will link that video below. That will kind of explain, that way you can reach out to me if you have specific questions, or if you are needing a 3D and Demi match, I can match you for both in the same color match. Okay, friends, so I went ahead and finished off with Love Spell Lip and Cheek, one of my very favorites, and now that it's a shade of the month, I can wear it again, yay! So I just have that on the lips and the cheeks, and I just wanted to make it a point. Blush also makes a difference. If you are tapping in with your finger and putting it on here and then buffing it onto the skin, what's that gonna do? If you color corrected anywhere here, you're gonna move your coverage. So again, be mindful of how you're using your brushes. It's why you see me after that very first initial color corrector buffing on step, I never buff on at that point. I press on everything after. I never sweep anything else across the skin. Even my illuminator, I then tap on, okay? So there you go. Love Spell, a little bit of rose gold, and I'm done. Oh, brows. I did do brows real quick. But I hope that was helpful. Again, troubleshooting coverage. There are obviously multiple ways to apply this makeup, but if you follow this method, I promise you're gonna get adequate coverage, and then you can tweak it easily depending on the day and your brush choice. All I do is use the exact same colors. In the summer, I usually like my skin to show and do very light coverage, and I just do the same method with just the blend brush. Normally, I'll do what I showed today, which is pretty much medium coverage. And then if I'm having a bad skin day or just feel like a more full coverage, more dramatic, I'd say date night look for a special event or for photos, then I can pick up this brush and do more full coverage for that kind of look. It's all in brush choices. Once you have your perfect highlight shades, I use the same shades. It's just brush choice, finishing, and then of course you always have that optional color correction if you truly want to get less texture on it. It's a game changer for under eyes and blemishes, in my opinion. All right, guys, so I've talked long enough, but I hope that was helpful. If you are needing a color match, if you are needing help with the colors you have, please let me know. Fill out my color match questionnaire in the drop box below the video. You will be able to get more help from me if you can tell me what colors you're using, maybe what's not working about it. If it's just, I'm not getting enough coverage, I'm not getting enough longevity, my under eyes are still giving me an issue, all of those things. If I know the colors you're currently using and the issues you're having, I can easily troubleshoot even in the color match I send back to you in order to tweak that color match even more so. Otherwise, I will just color match you generally based on your answers. And then obviously after, if you have additional information, you can always reach out to me. That is what I'm here for. As always, if you have any additional questions, drop them in the comments below. And thank you guys so much for being here. I will see you next week. Love you.